advocacy organization. Over the past few months, my fellow outlaw members and I have been diligently preparing for tonight's program in order to discuss the quickly swelling wave of support for marriage equality nationwide and the various legal battles and subsequent victories which have brought the freedom to marry to countless Americans already. Since last summer's landmark Supreme Court decisions, growth in public support for LGBT rights has continued to accelerate dramatically. In a recent Washington Post ABC News poll, a record 59% of respondents said that they supported allowing gays and lesbians to marry legally, with only 34% opposed. As most of you probably already know, Lambda Legal, with the support from Fairness West Virginia, filed a lawsuit in federal court on behalf of 3 same-sex couples seeking the freedom to marry in West Virginia. With this important litigation underway, there's no better time for all West Virginians to sit down and discuss why marriage matters for all loving and committed couples. This brings me to our esteemed guest. We are honored to welcome to the WVU College of Law, Evan Wolfson. Mr. Wolfson is the founder and president of Freedom to Marry, the campaign to win marriage equality nationwide. Before founding Freedom to Marry in 2003, Mr. Wolfson had already established himself as a prominent leader in the LGBT rights movement. In 1983, he wrote his Harvard Law School thesis on gay people and the freedom to marry. Keep in mind that that was more than 20 years before the landmark Supreme Court decision of Lawrence v. Texas, which outlawed sodomy laws, laws that effectively made it criminal to love someone of the same sex. Talk about a fearless trailblazer. During the 1990s, he served as co-counsel in the historic Hawaii marriage case that launched the ongoing global movement for the freedom to marry, and further, he has participated in numerous gay rights and HIV/AIDS cases. His book, Why Marriage Matters: America, Equality, and Gay People's Right to Marry, was referred to by Time Out New York as perhaps the most important gay marriage primer ever written. And I might add, Why Marriage Matters will be available for purchase after the presentation in the lobby. In 2004, Time magazine recognized his longtime civil rights leadership in the movement for marriage equality by naming Mr. Wolfson one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Tonight's program will be conducted as an interview between Mr. Wolfson and West Virginia's own Hoppy Kercheval. Hoppy, as he's known here, is a renowned West Virginia journalist, founder of West Virginia Metro News, and recipient of the Fairness West Virginia Institute's 2012 Accuracy and Fairness in Media Award. After their interview, we encourage the audience to ask questions of our guests. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Hoppy Kercheval and Evan Wolfson.
Welcome to West Virginia.
Good to be here.
Good to have you back.
Yes.
Because you've been here a little bit before.
I have.
Evan actually grew up in Pittsburgh. He spent some time there. He's visited West Virginia. He just got back from the Arctic. Brought a cold with him, so careful when you shake his hands. You know, he brought the cold back.
Sorry.
But it's good to have you. You know, before I get into the meat of this, it's as Brown talked about, that this scene is changing rapidly. And you must get, and we were talking about that earlier, you must get annoyed by that because people are saying, wow, this is all changing. And you say, well, wait a minute. I was doing this 25 years. I was doing this 30 years ago. Where was everybody then? Right?
Well, there is a little bit of that, but actually even I was not there at the beginning. Gay people have been challenging the denial of marriage since the dawn of what we think of as the modern gay rights movement. We usually date that to 1969 and the Stonewall Revolution in New York. Within 2 years of Stonewall, there were at least 3 major cases making their way through courts in different states across the country brought by couples who were denied the freedom to marry. And all of those cases were rubber stamped away. The country just was not ready. The conversation had not yet happened. And those couples and millions others were denied something very, very important. Now, the second wave of marriage litigation began in the very late 80s, early 90s, most importantly, the Hawaii case that was mentioned, that I was co-counsel in. And that case launched this ongoing global movement and the conversation and the momentum that we've talked about. So you can ask, well, what happened between that first wave and the second wave? Why were they so different? And the answer, really, most importantly, is AIDS. AIDS broke the silence about gay people, and AIDS prompted non-gay people to hear stories of gay couples and people wrestling and struggling with grief and discrimination, and it touched a lot of people's
Didn't
hearts.
it also produce a backlash against gay people?
Oh, AIDS! It was a ferocious assault at every level. But you know, there is no progress without struggle. There is no momentum without resistance. I mean, that's the story of America.
Why freedom to marry instead of gay rights? Okay, but because you repeatedly talk about that in interviews. No, it's freedom to marry, and you resist the terms like rights for gays.
Gay marriage,
yes,
is the term I resist. Yeah, well, gay people are not asking for gay marriage any more than women were asking for women's vote, or any more than we want African American employment. We want the same thing everybody has. We all want the same ability to participate fully and equally in society without unfair or arbitrary restriction. We're not trying to create something new and other and lesser called gay marriage. We're seeking to participate in the same marriage with its bundle of responsibilities and protections on the same terms as anyone else.
But Evan, isn't it new when you have a number of people in America, particularly older people, who would look at the right to marry and say, this is different, this is new compared to what I grew up with?
Well, what's new is that more people are able to participate in the same rules, the same responsibilities, and the same respect. But when more people participate, it doesn't change what it is for anyone else. It means that more people can participate. When women won the freedom to vote, we didn't have to come up with another word for voting. It didn't change what voting is. It meant that more people could fully participate. And that's what this is about. When gay people share in the freedom to marry, they don't use up the marriage licenses. There's still the same marriage for everyone to share.
We talked earlier today, you were on my show earlier today, and one of the things I asked you was when we talk about marriage, and marriage can mean different things and has historically meant some different things to people over the years. And you talked a few minutes ago before we started about a U.S. Supreme Court decision which actually didn't define marriage, but it said these are the characteristics of marriage. Talk about that.
Right. Well, gay people are not the first people to challenge exclusion from marriage or discrimination in marriage. And marriage has actually always been a battleground on which larger questions of what kind of society America is going to be have been contested. And so in an earlier freedom to marry case, a group of Americans came before the Supreme Court saying that the government's refusal to allow them to marry violated the Constitution. And as you said, in order to answer this question of whether the government should be able to keep those people from marrying, the court said it first needed to look at what is marriage. And the court listed 4 important attributes of marriage. The court said that marriage is, number 1, an opportunity to make an important public statement of commitment to another person. Number 2, marriage, the court said, has great meaning, particularly religious or spiritual meaning, to many people. Number 3, marriage offers what the court delicately put it as the prospect of physical consummation, which we usually call something else, but that's And fourth, the court said...
It didn't break that down, did it?
That's as far as it went. It's the Supreme Court. And fourth, the court said, marriage is the gateway to a vast and irreplaceable array of legal and economic protections and responsibilities. So weighing all those attributes, those interests, the court said, marriage is something very, very important. And accordingly, the court in that case, back in 1987, said that the government could not refuse that group of Americans the freedom to marry. Now, back in 1987, that group of Americans standing before the Supreme Court challenging this discrimination was prisoners. And the court said marriage, this bundle of interests, this bundle of meanings, is so important, it can't even be denied to convicted murderers.
That's profound. That had to fire you up.
Well, and by the way, it was a unanimous Supreme Court in 1987 that held that recognized how important marriage is.
If the court, since the court did that for prisoners, where has been the subsequent decision by the court concerning gays and lesbians?
Yeah. Well, there have been now 3 major, Brown mentioned one of them, 3 major important Supreme Court rulings over the past what year are we? 18 years
Yeah.
now, in which the court has basically staked out the constitutional principle yet again that Americans cannot arbitrarily be denied something important by the government that is provided to other Americans, and that if the government wants to do so, it has to show a reason. Now, the campaign that I'm involved with, Freedom to Marry, has always been building and continues to build toward the Supreme Court ruling and bringing the country to national resolution. That's how America does its civil rights business. We don't have to win within the four corners of every single state. No movement ever has. But we do have to win enough states and move enough public opinion and support to create the climate that will encourage the Supreme Court to finish the job. And I believe that the next case that reaches the Supreme Court, whenever that may be, sooner or later, and lately it's beginning to feel like it's going to be sooner, whenever that next case reaches the Supreme Court, we want to have created that climate of public support and enough states to say to the justices, you can do this. You can vindicate this constitutional freedom. It's okay. Not only will history vindicate you, but the country will do so. And the happy news for this campaign is that because of the kinds of conversations we've been having in forums like this, but even just in quiet conversations across kitchen tables, the majority of Americans have now come to understand that this denial is unfair and wrong and have moved in support of the freedom to marry. We want to make sure that conversation is happening here in West Virginia as well.
In your book, which I happen to have a copy of,
Excellent.
Why Marriage Matters, one of the things you say that stood out to me was, which actually I think is a profound argument, and it even can be used by conservatives for the freedom to marry. Exclusionary concepts of marriage fly in the face of our national commitment to freedom, as well as the personal commitment made by loving couples. And that's simple, but also profound, because it speaks to who we are as a country, a commitment to freedom, and then personal commitments to each other.
Right. Well, thank you. As I said earlier, marriage has always been this battleground on which larger questions have been contested. Questions such as who should get to decide whether you are locked in for life in a failed or abusive relationship, or whether you make the decision to divorce. And when we change that traditional understanding of marriage, we change marriage from a union based on coercion and compulsion, based on somebody else's idea of the right way to live, into a fundamental matter of commitment and choice and freedom. When we ended, for example, race restrictions on who could marry whom. At the time, the court that case came before the Supreme Court having gotten interracial marriage wrong before it got it right. But when it came again in 1967, 70% of the American people opposed interracial marriage. But the court did the right thing, acknowledging fundamental bedrock American principles, both of equality and of freedom.
And the Loving v. Virginia, and that's cited quite often in your book and by others who argue for the freedom to marry. But isn't that fundamentally different because it deals with race, and isn't, if you talk about same-sex couples, isn't that fundamentally different than the race issue?
It's different, but the principles that the court should apply and the analysis that should apply and the interests people have, whether people of color or interracial couples or prisoners or gay people, in seeking the freedom to marry, those interests are the same. And Loving versus Virginia was not just a race case. Loving versus Virginia was decided on two equal grounds. One was equal protection, an analysis whether the restriction the government had imposed on marriage had enough justification. And that restriction was based on race, and the court analyzed the race restriction and found it insufficient. The court then went on in Part 2 to look at the fundamental freedom involved, which was the freedom to marry itself, which is about shaping your life plan, the dream of finding someone you can build a life with, you can commit to, someone who will put up with you, and being able to pursue happiness. And that freedom is as important as the equal access to the freedom, because both are guaranteed to us under the Constitution. And in subsequent cases, the Supreme Court, won most powerfully by Justice Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, made very clear Loving was not just a race case. Loving was about the freedom to marry that matters to all Americans.
Let me take a little personal diversion here for you. And you got married a little bit later in life. Okay.
I was lucky to find him.
And I was tempted to say he robbed the cradle because he's younger than you are. But
now the interview is going to get.
But as you were on this long quest, did you ever have any personal not struggles, but thought that here I am in this fight for the freedom to marry, and I may not be able to ever benefit from that? Did you lay awake at night with any of that?
Well, I used to joke, that those who can't do litigate. And had lots of lines like that. But something, for me, actually, it did not begin as being about I want to get married. Mm-hmm. This was about truly these fundamental American guarantees and these values, and about history and about the wrong of it. It really wasn't because I myself wanted something. Now, when I myself did get the opportunity to fall in love mutually and have somebody who wanted to marry me as he, I felt it even more powerful. And to be able to share in not only the battle and the language of the freedom to marry and these important values and constitutional principles we've been talking about, but that whole language of the wedding and the whole ceremony and the whole people wanting to talk to you about your wedding and wanting to know how you did it and then tell you how you did it wrong and talk about your family and learn more about your family and tell these kinds of stories. Even though I had preached it intellectually, to be part of it just underscored how important this is as a connective language, as a common language. And for gay people to be shut out of that family and out of that language and out of that community harms them and harms the community and makes it all the more important.
In just a few minutes, we're going to take some questions, so be thinking about what you like to ask Evan, and we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. The building on the ceremony part is that marriage, of course, there's a state imprimatur, a state licensing of it, so there's a legal aspect to it. And in many cases, perhaps most cases, there's obviously a religious aspect as well. What happens when, in this movement, what happens when the religious part has not caught up to or doesn't catch up to the legal part? Because churches obviously have doctrine, and churches have protected rights too. Absolutely. By the Constitution. What happens when they bump up against each other?
Yeah, well, actually, they don't. They don't bump up against each other because government cannot and never will tell churches whom they must marry. It is up to each priest, rabbi, minister, imam to decide who they will marry according to the profession of faith and their views, and that is as important under the Constitution as anything else we're talking about. But at the same time, religion should not be dictating to the government who can get a civil or legal marriage license. There's a difference between religious rights, R-I-T-E-S, of marriage, and the legal right, R-I-G-H-T, to marry. And the fact is we have dealt with that difference for centuries without there being a problem or a conflict as we've emerged as a modern constitutional democracy. To give you one example, the government can never call over to a Catholic cathedral and say to the the cardinal, you must marry this divorced Catholic couple. Because in the Catholic faith, the cardinal will say, we do not believe in remarriage, and we will not perform that marriage in our cathedral. But nor should the cardinal be able to call over to the government license bureau and say, don't give that divorced couple a civil marriage license. And Americans understand that, and that's exactly how we've operated, and that's the way it is with gay people as well.
Can the cardinal, what about when the church, we pick on the Catholics here, but can the church go to the legislature and say, we don't think it's in the best interest to have freedom of marriage, therefore we want lawmakers to have Defense of Marriage Acts passed?
Well,
I mean, they can.
As Americans, as people, we can all say whatever we want, but for the government to act, the government is not supposed to serve as the weapon of any religious faith or even a majority religious faith. the government is supposed to, in order to protect not only personal freedom, but religious freedom, the government is supposed to act on the basis of solid, serious, secular reasons that work in a pluralistic democracy where everyone is entitled to different beliefs. And, there are many people of faith, and there are many religious leaders and increasing number of religious denominations that do welcome gay people and that do believe gay people should be married. Why would you impose one religion's view on those other religions? It's not the way our system is supposed to operate, and it doesn't operate.
Let me touch on a couple hot-button things that come up all the time but still need to be dealt with. Why not call it something else?
Because if you call it something else, it is something else. And something else is not as good as the something. Gay people want the freedom to marry for the same mix of reasons as non-gay people. And one of the most important protections that comes with marriage is the word marriage.
The word itself.
When you say, I'm married, everybody knows immediately who you are in relationship to the primary person you're building your life with. Most people consider that language, that statement, that commitment, that understood sharing as so important that they wear its symbol on their hand. It's one of the most important things we say about who we are in relationship to life and dreams and the person we build. The language, the commitment of marriage, and being held accountable for that commitment. Marriage brings a whole bundle of expectations, and we stand in front of our family and friends, and often our religious faith, or a judge, or somebody else important, and we make a promise, and we ask to be held accountable for that promise, that commitment that we make to this other person. To be denied all of that language and that meaning and that family connection is to be denied something very, very precious. And when you're traveling or when you're working, when you're dealing with life's ups and downs and life's crises, to be able to say, I'm married, as you run into the hospital because you got a phone call that your spouse had an accident, to be able to be there at his or her bedside and help make decisions or comfort, is a very different thing from having to fumble for 15 documents and calling a lawyer to try to persuade someone that the legal thing you wrote or this other thing called partnership or civil union or whatever is valid. That security or clarity, to be denied that, is something very, very real.
What if we took what you just said, very articulately, what if we took that and applied that to polygamy?
What gay people are saying is not, let's have no rules. Let's let everything happen. What gay people are saying is, let us have what you have. Just as you have the freedom to make this legal commitment to the person you love and that you want to build your life with, so do gay people want that freedom to make that commitment to the person that he or she loves. Now, the question of whether we should be able to make a commitment to 5 people or 20 people may be an interesting question to some, but it's a completely different question. And the reasons that the government would offer to justify the denial are not the same reasons that the government theoretically has to offer in order to justify why one couple should be treated differently from another couple. So when people bring it up, polygamy, it's usually because they want to change the subject and have a debate about polygamy. But that's not the question that's on the table. The question that's on the table here is, what reason does the government have for denying this committed couple the same freedom to marry that committed couple?
One of the arguments that is made by those who are against you on this is the procreation argument. Answer the procreation argument.
Actually, there's no better, the argument usually is that marriage it takes 2 forms. Either that marriage is for procreation, and since gay people in and of themselves cannot procreate as a couple, they shouldn't be allowed to marry. And then there's another version of the argument that is, it's better for the kids to be raised by biological parents. So the best answer to this was given by somebody I rarely agree with, Justice Scalia, who noted in the Lawrence case that Brown referenced back in 2003 that if we don't uphold the restrictions on so-called sodomy that the court struck down in 2003, he said, it calls into question the question of why we don't allow gay people to marry. Because he said, surely you can't say it's because of procreation, because we allow infertile people to marry. We allow octogenarians to marry. We allow people who don't want to have children to marry. The government doesn't issue procreation licenses. It's issuing a marriage license. And the other point is that many gay people, including people right here in West Virginia, are raising kids. And if we care about those kids, we would want them to have the same protections, the same safety net, the same dignity for their family that everyone else wants for their kids. And every single leading expert in this country, public health authorities, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the National Association of Social Workers, go right down the list. Every single one of them has said that ending the discrimination in marriage would help kids, and that excluding gay couples from marriage does nothing to help any family but hurts some.
As with the research, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought when the U.S. Supreme Court ordered a halt to freedom of marriage or same-sex marriage in Utah, didn't they also say, or wasn't there upheld a lower court ruling that said that the best scenario for children is to be in the home, two parents in the home of the biological family?
No, that's what the state, has argued in each of the marriage cases, and every time and time again. We just finished the third trial in which a government was given the opportunity to come into court, bring in experts, put them on the stand, put them under oath, bring in the research, cross-examine the opposition. And in each of the three trials, first in Hawaii in 1996, then in California, the Prop 8 trial, and now in Michigan just the last couple weeks. In each case, all the experts testified on the side of allowing gay couples to marry and protecting the children, and pointed out that denying gay couples the freedom to marry does nothing to help any kids. It just hurts those kids. And the government time and time again keeps saying it, but then has no evidence to back it up, and the courts are increasingly finding no logic to back it up. Because even if it were true somehow, which it isn't, that one set of parents were better than another, how does it help anybody to punish these kids for having the wrong kinds of parents? It doesn't change their parents. It doesn't increase the amount of marriage available. All it does is harm some kids while helping no one else.
We'll get questions coming up next. I'll call you up on that here in just a minute. But getting back to maybe your first point, is this ongoing struggle, is it going to be one primarily through a U.S. Supreme Court decision or primarily one at a time?
Yeah. So the Freedom to Marry strategy, this campaign that...
And I don't mean state by state, I mean hearts and minds.
Well, the strategy has always been that the way we're going to win, the way we're going to end this discrimination, the same way as we ended race restrictions on marriage or ended the legal subordination of women, is when the Supreme Court brings the entire country to national resolution. But history also tells us that the court doesn't do that sort of magically, and it doesn't do it in the beginning. It does it after a movement, through millions and millions of conversations and through enough people taking action and some political and legal battles in the course of a struggle, when a movement has won a critical mass of states and a critical mass of public support. So this campaign, the strategy has always been to build that critical mass of states through these persuasion and conversations and real-life stories of people harmed and touch the hearts of people and move people. And fortunately, as everybody can now feel, we have this irrefutable momentum, as now millions of Americans have changed their minds. And 59%, according to the latest poll, now support the freedom to marry. It was 27% when I was doing that trial in Hawaii, the world's first ever, back in 1996. So in less than 2 decades, we've more than doubled the number of Americans who have changed their mind and support the freedom to marry.
You know,
by the way, that support, according to the latest poll, is not to be found just on the coasts or just in a few pockets. Every region of the country, including the South, now has majority support for the freedom to marry because people have seen with their own eyes and had a chance to talk and think it through and not just shut it down, but have actually thought about their real values and have moved.
Well, you know, when you got Dick Cheney on your side, things are changing, right?
Yeah. Well, Dick Cheney, another person I don't always agree with, let's just say, he put it very well. He said freedom means freedom for everyone. And, of course, his heart was touched, we assume, because, in fact, in that Republican family, in that conservative family, he has a gay family member. And when you think about a real person, not an abstraction, not a stereotype, not the prejudices and fears of the past, but the real people who are part of our community, most people will rise to fairness. And Dick Cheney did, and a majority of Americans have, and it's time for West Virginia to do that too.
With that, why don't we open up for questions for Evan? Just come up to the mic, ask a question, make a comment. Don't be shy.
I'm a little concerned about the case that we have here in West Virginia because the judge, the district court judge, had set a deadline, I think it was February 18th, for Lambda Legal to bring in plaintiffs who were married outside of West Virginia and living in West Virginia. And Lambda Legal decided not to do that. And obviously this will preclude an outcome like we had in Kentucky or Ohio. I was wondering, what do you think about that? And are you aware of some sort of a strategy that is lost on me that would explain why Lambda Legal took that route?
Well, first of all, let me say, as you may know, I used to work for Lambda Legal. I worked there for many years. When I was doing the Hawaii trial, I was working with Lambda, and I'm very close friends with and colleagues with Lambda Legal, and I have complete confidence in Lambda Legal's attorneys and skill and leadership, and I'm very proud that they are working with West Virginians here in this case, and I'm confident that they will do a very good job. Gay people experience marriage discrimination in the country in two forms now. One is when we are denied the freedom to marry. So, for example, here in West Virginia, no matter how long a couple has been together, no matter whether they're raising kids, no matter whether they're paying taxes, no matter how much they need the protections and responsibilities that come with marriage, if they go to a marriage bureau, city hall, here in West Virginia, they are denied. Even if a couple that met just 10 minutes before decides to walk in and get a license, they can. But that committed couple can't. So the denial of the freedom to marry is one form of marriage discrimination. Another form of marriage discrimination we have still in the United States is the refusal to respect lawful marriages that have been celebrated. So we now have 17 countries and the District of Columbia, our nation's capital, where gay people can get married, unlike here in West Virginia. 40% of the American people now live in a freedom to marry state, up from 0 a decade ago. So when people get married and come back home to West Virginia, they ought to be treated as what they are, married. Now, the federal government will now, thanks to our Supreme Court victory last year, will treat those couples as married for federal protections, but West Virginia won't. So there are those two kinds of discrimination. And what the judge may be saying is, I want to look at the second, not the first, or I may want to look at the second and the first. And what Lambda Legal and the plaintiffs have put forward is a very simple claim. We're in love. We're committed. This is our home. We want to get married. And whatever form of one or both of those kinds of discrimination is before the courts, this case is one of, as of today, 58 cases in 28 states, all making their way forward, some of which present the first kind of discrimination, some of which present the second, some of which present both. All of that is heading toward the Supreme Court. And so the important thing to do is not, for those of us who are not the lawyers in the court, is not to be worrying about the legal mechanics of the case, but to be worrying and making sure that we are doing everything we can to make the same strong case in the court of public opinion that our lawyers are certainly going to be doing in the court of law, because that's what maximizes our chance of winning. And that's what I would focus on. Are we doing everything we can here in West Virginia to create the climate that will enable this judge and other judges and other decision makers to do the right thing?
Hi. I'd like to add my thanks to you for coming here to Morgantown. Certainly appreciate it. I know in tracking or following the different states that are now recognizing the right to marriage, I've been somewhat surprised by the geographic and political diversity. So I'd love to hear your predictions of what's coming next.
Well, as I said, as of today, I literally used to be every decade, and then it was every year, and then it was every month, every quarter. Now it's literally every day something changes, and I have, thank God, a very talented staff that is sending me throughout the day emails about this date was just set in that case, and this judge has now said she's going to rule on that, et cetera. As of just a couple days ago, we had 9 federal judges out of 9 who have now ruled in just the past few months in favor of ending marriage discrimination in one kind of case or the other, but all basically pointing to the same constitutional principles and the same fundamental fairness. And it's clear that what is going to happen next is there are going to continue to be more rulings, and we are now in front of, I think it's 5 circuit courts, soon to be 6. We've won now 9 times in the last few months at the lower court level, 9 out of 9. They're now making their way to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 9th, and the 10th circuits. The 7th Circuit will likely soon be coming as soon as we see the ruling that's going to come any day now out of Michigan. And there are, as I said, 58 cases and counting. Every day seems to bring yet another case in another state. So what's going to happen on the legal map is more dynamism, more progress, and potentially a few losses as well, as all of this continues moving forward and the house divided of discrimination begins to collapse. But what really needs to happen to make that happen is more conversations, more persuasion, more people telling their stories, more people asking others to think it through, asking the same kinds of good questions that Hoppy was just asking or that I have in my book, because we owe it to the fair-minded people of this country to give them the chance to rise to fairness. And the way to do that is to engage in conversation about values like the Golden Rule and about real stories of real couples and the real unfairness of being denied something this important.
I wanted to know your opinion about, you said that prisoners were granted the right to marry. How does the Supreme Court justify that based on why gay marriage isn't universal now?
Well, the case in 1987 involved that group of people who had come before the court, and that was prisoners. And the court did what courts are supposed to do. The court is supposed to say, what's at stake? Who's harmed? Is there a justification for that harm? Is the justification good enough to warrant the restriction or the burden? And in that case, the court applied that analysis and found that there is not a good enough reason for arbitrarily denying even prisoners something this important. There are now 58 and counting cases making in one form or another that same kind of argument. These are couples either who are legally married or couples who want to be legally married, who've made that commitment in life and now want that commitment in law. And they're all coming now into court or into personal conversations and in some places into legislatures. And they're telling their stories and they're asking the decision maker, particularly the judges and soon the justices, to listen to their story, to really not just rubber stamp it, but to ask what is the legal justification and does it measure up? And the reason we're winning 9 out of 9 is because we have now shown that there is no good reason for this denial. Not one. And when there is no good reason in America, the government should not discriminate.
Hi. As a faculty member here, I also want to say thank you so much for coming to WVU. It's just such an honor to have you here. And I am amazed and proud at how far our country has come since Lawrence v. Texas. It's amazing how quickly it's all happened. But I'm curious to hear, because I know you've heard this, so I'm curious to know your response to kind of the challenge within the gay community that this is not the main issue. I mean, what about violence against trans folks in prisons or bias against gay people in the criminal justice system, or we actually had an Employment Non-Discrimination Act introduced this year by our delegate, who is openly gay, Delegate Skinner, our only one and our first one, and that failed. and it failed last year as well. So just more broadly, why is marriage where you feel the battle really is?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't believe in false either-ors, and I'm sure you don't either. So I don't think gay people should be forced to decide which is more important to me, my love or my job, my physical safety or my ability to get an education. I mean, we want it all. And the failure, for example, of West Virginia law to protect gay people's opportunity to participate fully in society, whether it's employment or marriage, whether it's transgender people's access to medical care or safety, whether it's youth, whether it's senior, all of that is wrong, and all of that requires work, and it's good when anybody works on any of it. Having said that, I have always believed, as somebody who has worked on the range of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender concerns over now way too many decades, as somebody who's worked on so many of these fronts and believes in all of them, I've always believed, and I argued this in my paper when I was a law student, that fighting for the freedom to marry is important not only because marriage is important, and there is no one thing we could win that would more and more exclusion and discrimination than marriage, but that's not the only reason I think it's important and argued that it was important. I also believed and argued that fighting for the freedom to marry would be engaging this vocabulary of love and commitment and connection and family and being part of the community that would help non-gay people change their hearts and minds and come to understand better who we are in a way that would increase our ability to end more of the exclusion across the board. So no one thing is everything, and our work will not be done when we've won the freedom to marry. And by the way, we have not yet won the freedom to marry, so we're not done. But the engagement over marriage has moved public understanding and opened the door to more gains and more wins across more fronts than any other particular part of our struggle has. And you don't, now, when I first was making this case and we were having these debates, you could say that was a theoretical proposition. But we now have 10, 20, 30 years of history, and we can see very clearly that as a movement, we have made more progress in public opinion. We've made more progress in law during the marriage chapter than we did during the very long chapter in which we were denied it, circumvented, ran away from it, disparaged it. And it's precisely because it is this powerful language of connection that has helped move more people to our side. And as they come to our side, it's absolutely right to remind them that gay people no more only want the freedom to marry than non-gay people want only the freedom to marry.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Thank you for coming. I guess I just need words of encouragement. My husband and I moved here from California a year and a half ago. And we found, first of all, not much of an organized gay community. And we've met a lot of people who say, oh, yeah, I have adult kids who are gay, but they left West Virginia years ago and they're never going to come back here. And we have horrible politicians here. Our congressman sent me a really nasty letter when I asked him about gay marriage, and also one of our Democratic senators also sent me a kind of a nasty letter about why he was opposed to same-gender marriage. And I don't know, sometimes I just feel very despairing about living in this state, that there seems to be so much prejudice against us here. And so few adult gay people out of college who would actually stay in this state. And yet we just got here, and we've been treated very well within the community where my spouse works. I don't work, so I don't deal with a lot of things. But I think I just need some encouragement about why we should stay here and be in this state at all.
I think the answer is because, as you just rightly said, there are many, many good people here, and what they need is the same opportunity, sometimes over time, to rise to fairness that we've now seen a majority of Americans engage in. When I began this work, we were at about 27%. We were losing in places like California, New York, etc. We lost a battle not too long ago in California.
I remember.
And we came back from that battle not feeling discouraged, although very hurt and beleaguered and traumatized, but not giving up. And we engaged the conversation, and we continued reaching out to the fair-minded and giving them what they needed to hear, which is the real stories of real people like you and your husband, and an opportunity to wrestle with their conscience and wrestle with their values and move. And if we can make that move, if we can see that progress, as the polls now tell us we are seeing, in all parts of the country, including the South, we can make that progress here in West Virginia. But it comes when enough good people, including the people in this room, engage others over time, trusting that through engagement we get to marriage. And yeah, it can be disheartening, and it is certainly on a deep level very unfair that people should have to fight for something they should have. But of course, that story is not unique to gay people.
No.
That's part of the American experience for almost everybody. And the good news is, I'll say in my relatively limited time, even on this trip, I've actually have met young people who are committed to staying here where they live and actually chose to go to school here at WVU because they want to serve the community and be part of their community. And without betraying confidences, I've been told stories of people who had tough childhoods here and weren't treated with the kind of values that people profess. But they also see the goodness, and they see the love, and they see the opportunity, and they're determined to make a difference. And that's the hope that West Virginia has. And enough of us have to support people like that and people like you to tell our stories, to engage other people, to give them the time and the encouragement and the push to get where they need to be, to live up to their own values.
Thank you.
And let me say one other thing, which is that there are two ways we can bring the freedom to marry to West Virginia. One is within West Virginia, and the other is as the country as a whole gets there, and West Virginia is brought along. Sitting here today, we may have our guess as to which one it's going to be, but we don't know. What we do know is the more we do here in West Virginia to have these conversations and to reach out to people and encourage them and gently push them to live up to their own values, it may not be what brings West Virginia across the finish line, but it will create the space that will encourage more people to open up and to be part of the conversation, and more young people to stay here, and more young non-gay people who don't want to live in an anti-gay state to stay here, and that's going to strengthen the community as a whole as well. So that's the way we have to do our work here, as in every other part of the country.
I'm part of a minority now, too. Thank you very much. I was thinking as you were talking about some similarities between the anti-discrimination movement in the United States against blacks or apartheid in South Africa, and that people in the majority often have joined in those marches or by representing the minority. But when I think back upon the symbolic acts, whether it's James Meredith or Rosa Parks or Nadine Gordimer marching in South Africa, the symbolic acts have mostly taken place on the part of the minority, the discriminated against. The majority has joined, but I was wondering, are you aware of or do you recommend any symbolic acts that the heterosexually married have done or could do on behalf of, aside from joining the struggle and the conversation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say Freedom to Marry about 3 weeks ago launched Southerners for the Freedom to Marry. This is a campaign working with groups like Fairness West Virginia and non-gay allies as well in states like West Virginia, but in 14 states across the country, precisely in order to encourage all of us to step up these conversations and to give really an opportunity to be seen and heard to the many non-gay people who do support this, but haven't spoken out, either because they thought it was hopeless or pointless, or they were waiting for the gay people to do it, or they felt like they were the only ones. Well, we want people to know they're not the only ones, and we need non-gay people as well as gay people to now speak up. And we kicked off that video, and your list of heroes reminded me of this. We kicked off that campaign with a video that you can see on our website, freedomtomarry.org, or on YouTube, of Congressman John Lewis, the last living speaker at the 1963 March on Washington, probably the greatest living American, a civil rights icon. And he talked about why he is a Southerner for the freedom to marry. And he said this is a question of civil rights. It's a question of dignity. It's a question of equality. And this is what we all need to stand up for. So we want to hear more voices like John Lewis and like you and like others speaking up. And it's our job as gay people to tell our stories and to speak up and to not write people off. And it's our job as non-gay people to not wait for somebody else to either give us permission or to ask us to be involved. This is the time. And Congressman John Lewis was a perfect example and obviously is always an inspiration. The second half of your question is what's the best thing to do? And while symbolism symbolism almost trivializes the kinds of heroism that people have shown at various points, and there's heroism when gay couples break their silence and speak out and tell their story, like the questioner a little bit ago, like the couples who have gone into marriage license bureaus across the South and engaged the clerks and asked for those marriage licenses knowing they're going to be denied. That's an important part of civil rights work. But the key engine, the way in which we have been winning and the way in which we will win, is not necessarily through drama, though drama has its place. It's through conversation. So the most important thing you or anyone else can do is talk to everyone else you know in your life, your college roommates, old friends, coworkers, family members, neighbors, about your values, why this matters to you, the need to speak up, that you want West Virginia to get where it needs to be. Did they know that there's this couple living down the road, or that you know your sister or your old teacher? Whatever the story, whatever the hook, whatever the personal context you want to give it. But the most important engine of change is those conversations. And I know it sounds almost so small that people feel like they need something bigger, but that is how people have changed their hearts and minds. And the work we do in the battles are important in breaking through the legal barriers that exist. But what gives those judges, what gives those elected officials, what gives those state attorneys general, the decision makers, the courage to move and do the right thing is those personal conversations and personal asks again and again and again. So that's where to put your time and energy. It doesn't have to be drama. It needs to be this engagement.
This comes up on my radio show actually fairly frequently, and I defend gay marriage for the Freedom to Marry show, and which produces a lot of interesting phone calls and tweets and texts. Today, after you were on the show, there were some interesting tweets and texts. And for a lot of folks, and I don't want to disparage these folks because this is a very deeply religious and conservative state who live their lives by values which they find in the Old and New Testament. And they will define homosexuality as sinful. And that's a stopper. That's right. To be honest.
Yeah. Right. Well, first of all, people are entitled to their religious views, and there are many, many, many millions of people of faith who support the freedom to marry. And many of them do so precisely because of their values, whether religious or moral or spiritual. They believe deeply in what they, not just some phrase they picked out of the Bible as a weapon, but in the values that the Bible is teaching. Fundamental among them, the golden rule: treat others as you would want to be treated. Judge not, that you not be judged. If Pope Francis can say that, so can we. And what the Bible and what religion and what values are saying is that, number one, why would you want to deny somebody the opportunity in this precious time on this planet to find love and to be part of the family, to be part of the community, to be brought into the inn, not kicked out to the manger? Why would you want to turn your back on somebody else? Is that what your religion has taught you? But the second question is, whatever you may feel religiously, whatever your answer on how you want to live your life, there is also value in the fact that we live in a country where we agree to share. And one of the things we share in the interest of protecting religious freedom is personal freedom to shape our lives under the law without the government being used as a weapon to impose your view on me or my view on you. And the Bible, by the way, has something to say about that too. It says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. What we're talking about here is civil or legal marriage licenses. We can agree to disagree as people of faith and as religious leaders and as churches. And government has no business picking sides or telling a church what to do. But we shouldn't be using religion through the government as a weapon.
Thank you all very much for that insightful discussion. Before we end things, I just wanted to quickly thank a few people, my friend and colleague Bradley Milam, as well as Outlaws faculty advisor Jennifer Powell, without whose help and guidance this program would not have been possible today. Also, Hoppy for graciously agreeing to interview our guest, and finally, I want to again thank Mr. Wolfson for coming all the way out here to West Virginia and sharing with us his expertise and insight into this pressing issue. It's only through the commitment and passion of leaders like Mr. Wolfson that significant and meaningful change will be able to come about for America's LGBT individuals. Now I'd like to invite everyone to join our guests in the lobby behind you for a reception. Thanks again for coming.